Hello there guys, and welcome back to the channel. So today's video is going to be all about Quake, and I will be doing my best to explain why in my opinion Quake is the single best champion in the game. So in this video we're going to be taking a look at many different quests and fights in Act 6, Variant 1 and Variant 2, where I'm going to be explaining why Quake is such a unique, versatile character and why I think she stands ahead above the rest of them. So first of all, we are taking a look at 6.11 No Retreat global node, which Quake is pretty much unaffected by. Just because she can always heavy and parry, she has no need to bait out opponent's special attacks, therefore she has no need to kind of dance around and bait out and try and dash back. So there's that. Also, this Moon Knight is on Can't Touch Me node. It means he has a 50% chance to evade all our incoming attacks. However, since we're never really actually attacking the Moon Knight, that node is rendered completely useless yet again. So right off the bat we can see that Quake is going to be absolutely amazing against every single champion in the game that has evade mechanic or auto block mechanic, just because she has no need to attack them. Therefore she will never get evaded and she will never get auto blocked. And so let's move on to the next fight. As you can see, the Moon Knight fight went slightly easy. I did mess up and then, but it's not a big deal. Now we're going to be taking a look at the next quest in Act Point 6, and we're going to be taking a look at Biohazard in particular. So as we all know, typically you want an immune champ for Biohazard, at least a bleed immune champion, if not bleed and poison immune champion, because you have a chance to get a bleed or poison debuff every time you strike opponent or hit his block. But anyways, since Quake doesn't attack opponent, even though she is not bleed or poison immune, she has absolutely no problem dealing with Biohazard in any piece of content really. So if I wanted to, I could always revert here in this video just to heavy parry method, but typically I like to play Quake with heavy evade. Again, Quake is one of those champions that's going to be kind of as good as you are with her, and you can play her in several different ways, and the more you use her, the better you're going to get at it. So initially, I do urge anybody who has Quake to take her in quests as much as possible, practice, and do initially what you saw in the first clip, just heavy and parry. And once you get more comfortable with Quake, do kind of slowly try and transition to full heavy dex method, just because once you learn that, Quake is going to unlock completely new set of utilities and is going to be able to counter a completely new set of different nodes. So even with class disadvantage, the fight is nearly over. Didn't take long at all for Quake, and that is a check-in Biohazard box there. So Quake does have some weak matchups though, and if we can look forward, and then we can see that Killmonger is definitely one of them. Killmonger is a really bad matchup for Quake, and I'm going to speak a bit more about those later on. But next we're taking a look at long distance relationship Ultron and the next quest of Act 6. So we are supposed to receive a debuff when our opponent is close to us for a prolonged period of time. However, Quake's concussion ability actually shuts that off for most part. As long as we're charging heavy attack, we're getting no debuffs applied to us, as you can see here. So Quake's concussion not only reduces opponent's ability accuracy to 0, it also works against the nodes. Obviously, because opponent is going to be trying to strike you and you're going to have to let go of your heavy attack, you are eventually going to get a few of those stacks on you, but you can easily work around that just by launching a heavy attack just before your stun is about to kick in. That means opponent's going to be standing away from you for a prolonged period of time, and you're going to get rid of all those annoying pesky weakness debuffs. As we can see in this video as well, we did not have to deal with Ultron's regeneration, neither at 15 nor 25%. So another point in Quake's box that she pretty much shuts off vast majority of the champion abilities just by her concussion debuffs. So yeah, this fight is over, and let's move on to the next one. Next one is going to be that annoying aspect of war, Rhino with close encounters in the Loki quest in Act 6. So with close encounters, it's kind of a touch and go, because it really depends where your opponent stops, whether you're going to be healing or degenerating. However, overall, just because Quake does have like kind of close quarter combat, for most part, you will be spending majority of the time with the regen on. And as far as it goes for aspect of war, Quake can handle those nodes quite easily if you are playing well enough with Quake, because, well, first of all, he's never going to be unstoppable just because he's never going to launch special attacks, so that part of aspect of war node is completely neutralized. And even if it wasn't, Quake absolutely doesn't care if opponent is unstoppable or not, because she's never going to be trying to strike the opponent. The one problem with Aspect of War node is that your block proficiency is reduced, and eventually opponents can go completely unblockable. And once again, if you can play Quake well enough, and if you have put in some practice with Quake, it still doesn't matter, just because you can evade every single incoming attack launched at you, so your block proficiency in this scenario does not matter. However, there we can go to what I said previously, that Quake gets a lot better the more you play with Quake and the more you learn how to play with Quake. So let's say if you can't fully evade opponents' attacks, Quake won't be your best answer for Aspect of War. However, if you can fully heavy index opponents' attacks, then you have no problems dealing with even such an annoying node as Aspect of War. Even though Rhino has increased physical resistance, and that is annoying, and he has also armor aggression. As we can see, throughout the entire fight, he only got 6 stacks of armor, which, if we wanted to, we could have removed by striking him while he was stunned. But I just kind of didn't want to bother. But we are going to show that technique later on in the video. So yeah, the fight here is nearly over, and we're going to be moving on to the next, and that's going to be Havoc at 616. So far, if you have been paying attention, you can notice a common theme that Quake is pretty much unfazed by all the annoying global buffs you have in Act 6, just because she doesn't really interact with opponents and with the fighting mechanics like any other champion. Anyways, Havoc, I know many people have been complaining that this is kind of like a big problem for them, especially just because you have to fight him multiple times because he is at the beginning of the map. But as we can see here, Quake's concussion actually prevents Havoc from gaining any of his plasma charges, let alone letting him place any on us. And the only problem in Havoc fight is his small passive power gain, so eventually he will reach 1 bar of power. We can simply bypass that by pushing him to 2 bars as soon as our stun hits and evading that, and that also will get rid of his plasma charges. So once we get him to 2 bars of power, we simply have to bait out 1 level 2, and we can go back to our regular playstyle, just with heavy and dex and heavy and evade. In this video, purposely, I didn't even try to evade every single attack he was launching at me, just to show that you don't have to be an amazing Quake player to use Quake against Havoc and come out of that fight completely scot-free and without taking any plasma detonation damage. So Quake was my personal answer for this Havoc in pretty much every single time I had to fight him in Act 6. So there we go. Again, one of more annoying fights, one of more annoying defenders and champions to fight against, and Quake has no problem against it. Now we're taking a look at Variant 2. And again, even though the node has size matters on, and opponents have a high chance to glance all the incoming attacks since we're not an extra large champion, once again that node is rendered completely useless just because Quake isn't really striking an opponent. On top of that, I wanted to show that Quake can do nodes like Aggression Fury, Aggression Regeneration, just because her concussion shuts those nodes off completely. Well, while they are striking us, they will eventually get a buff or few of them, and you can approach that fight then in 2 ways. You can either just completely ignore them. So long as you don't hit, it doesn't matter how many Furies they do have, just because they're never going to be landing an attack. That means you're not going to be taking any damage or block damage, and you can still walk away from that fight completely scot-free. However, that is a bit risky and a tricky thing to pull off, because you need to be able to fully evade all of opponent's attacks, and that leaves no room for error. So what do you do when you do play Quake at a reasonable standard, but not perfect, let's say? Not that I'm trying to say I play her perfectly. I do still have my fair share of mistakes and mess-ups, but overall I do feel comfortable with the champ. But regardless, here we can have another example of Aggression Fury in Variant 2, and without kind of like trying to fully evade all of the incoming attacks, that's going to help us in 2 different ways. So first of all, using heavy parry is a lot easier than using heavy and full dexterity. Heavy parry method also maximizes the amount of time you have concussion on the opponent, just because you have to evade less. That's why you have to kind of like drop your heavy attack charge less often, so it minimizes the amount of Furies they get in the first place. And then the second thing is, if they do manage to get up a couple of Furies or any other of these aggression buffs on them, you can always strike them a couple of times while they are under parry stun or while they are under concussion stun. Like I'm going to show at the end of this video, he did manage to get 2 Fury buffs on him. I landed a heavy attack, I punched him a couple of times. If he wouldn't have died, he would have been left without any buffs on him regardless. So next fight, we're going to be taking a look at Green Goblin on power gain node. So he gets 100% power gain, but once again, Quake absolutely does not care about this power gain just because we're not going to be striking him, and he's not going to be gaining any power whatsoever. As we all know, there is like an annoying Magneto boss with 200% power gain in one of the variant chapters, and Quake can handle him perfectly fine as well. In addition to being able to deal with all this increased power gain, we are also able to completely bypass, let's say, Green Goblin's and majority of other champions' abilities just because of the concussion and the fact that a lot of these abilities trigger while they are being struck or while they are striking you, which is clearly not happening in this fight. So Green Goblin is not having any regen on him at all whatsoever. And that basically makes this fight like any other fight. Like Green Goblin would have no nodes, no abilities. It's just his animation that you have to worry about, and just basically either heavy parry or heavy fully evade all of his incoming attacks. Once again, all these power gain nodes is something you can deal with even if you can't play Quake perfectly. You can always resort to heavy and parry, and you're not going to have any issue whatsoever dealing with these opponents on improved power gain nodes. So next we're going to be taking a look at Variant 1, which is regarded pretty much as the most difficult content in the game currently. So we're going to be taking a look at 3.3 Buffet, Node, Electro, and Korg fights. So again, there's Buffet, and Quake once again shines on these kind of nodes just because she doesn't have any inherent buffs that she would trigger. There is the dexterity buff that you trigger once at the beginning of the fight. That means you will trigger opponent's Buffet once, but so long as you don't land any attacks on opponent, that's all that's going to happen. And the rest of the fight, you're going to be able to play it perfectly normal. You're not going to be trying to dodge his landing attacks and re-trigger your dexterity buff. You're just going to have that one dexterity buff on you for the entire fight. Now, I know I did make a small slip up here. I did land my heavy attack that removed my dexterity, so I'm going to have to deal with another heal. But that was my user error, not Quake's fault. However, here we can see that his health is diminishing quickly. We're not taking any damage back from Electro just because we're not striking him. Even if we were striking him while he has concussion on, he can't deal any damage back to us. And once again, Buffet node is rendered completely useless. Same as that Fisticuffs node at the beginning of the fight. So next, as soon as this fight's going to finish, we're going to be taking a look at the Korg fight. Now, Korg is pretty much regarded as one of the more difficult defenders in the game and opponents to fight against, just because if you trigger buffs on yourself and if you trigger the evade his attacks, he's going to go unblockable and unstoppable. In addition to that, his special one attack is quite tricky to evade. So that combined with Buffet, that really makes for a tricky opponent. However, Quake, this fight differs absolutely nothing from the fight before. It is exactly the same difficulty level. It is just as hard or easy as it was doing Electro to do with Korg, just because we do not care about his unblockable, we do not care about his unstoppable, we do not care about Buffet on this node either, and that's about it. We just play Quake as normal. So once again, instead of being forced into a difficult fight, which would almost certainly result us with losing quite a bit of health, either by getting hit because he's unblockable and unstoppable, or by taking damage back from Korg's own abilities, we can basically do this fight just like any other fight without any problems, without any issues, without losing any health, and without any increased difficulty in the fighting. So now I'm actually going to be trying to my best to explain the case why Quake is the best champion in my opinion. There are going to be some fights going on in background. It's going to be the same Electro fight that I did before, but instead I will be using 4 and 3-star Quake, just to show that even the star level or your power index doesn't really matter to Quake. Just she's able to handle all of these opponents as a 5-star, as a 4-star, and a 3-star. So if you do not have a 5-star Quake, 4-star Quake is still extremely viable. Only difference there is that you will have to be a lot more consistent with your play, and the fights will last longer. That's why you need to be able to keep your focus on for a longer periods of time. However, the fight in itself does not increase in difficulty. It is exactly the same thing as you would be using 5-star. Therefore, even 4-star Quake could potentially be one of your best answers to some of the most trickier fights in the game. So while the fights are happening in background, I'm going to be trying to make my case for Quake with 3 main arguments. Number 1, I think Quake is the best champion in the game just because she completely bypasses the regular and the ordinary fighting mechanics. You do not have to deal with opponent's special attacks. You do not need to learn how to evade them. You do not need to deal with opponent's abilities for most part. You do not even need to kind of properly read them to be able to Quake them, knowing that they will not matter. for most part. Like whenever there is a new quest coming out and there are new champions with new nodes and new abilities, my first my first question always, despite of all the size of my roster, is can I Quake it? Because I know that Quake can deal with the vast majority of the issues in this game, and if Quake can handle it, then we're gonna be perfectly fine. And that's one of the main points here. Like no matter how nasty defenders opponents make, like the Thing, like Quake, like now Ebony Maw might be tricky when he comes out, Quake simply bypasses pretty much all of them. That being said, she does have some inherent weaknesses, like weakness to True Strike, or any kind of sort of evade negation. So champions like Agent Venom, like Corvus Glaive and so on, might prove to be problem to her. Well, Corvus not so much, just because he never really gets the True Strike mission against Quake. But you guys know what I mean. Anything with active True Strike or true accuracy, like Night Thrasher, you can't evade. Like you can't evade Ghost, you can't evade some other champions. So those are her kryptonite. So there are few characters that she can't fight well against. But against the vast majority of the champions in the game, she has absolutely no problem dealing with, and it is going to be same exact fight regardless of how tricky these defenders are. And my argument number 2, so in addition to completely bypassing the vast majority of the champion abilities and most of the game mechanics, it's just the sheer number of nodes she can deal with. She can deal with all or nothing, power gain nodes, nodes like Buffet, all these XL size nodes in variant 2, fisticuffs. There's nothing really in the game aside from a couple of nodes that Quake struggles with. Even the nodes that she does not have a perfect matchup with, she can often bypass to an extent due to her concussion and her being able to negate nodes themselves that affect champions in the game. And the third and possibly the most important point that I'm going to try and explain briefly is just the simple thing that every fight with the Quake is the same regardless of the difficulty. So if we were to, let's say, point out a difficulty index to a fight, let's say that would be Magneto, right? So if you're fighting a Magneto without any nodes, champions like Corvus will walk through him much easier than Quake will, because Quake has higher base difficulty index of fighting, higher skill cap, as opponents like to, as people like to say. So Quake will not necessarily be your preferred champion for general questing, just because she has a higher kind of like difficulty index of every single fight she enters compared to many of the more popular questing choices like Omega Red and Corvus, because those guys can deal with many things really quickly without much problem, and the fights are simply easy. However, what happens when the fights get increasingly more difficult? Let's say if we're adding 100% power gain to that Magneto, then the power balance there equalizes, because while you're using conventional and normal champions like Corvus, Omega Red, and so on and so forth, the difficulty level of that fight will increase exponentially, just because it's a lot more harder to deal with a lot of power. You're having to bait out special attacks, you're needing to deal with all of these game mechanics. However, the fight itself is going to remain exactly the same for Quake. It's not going to get not a single point more difficult. So what happens even if you ramp up the difficulty of that fight even more and add some more nasty nodes to that? Let's say, I don't know, Biohazard, increase the power gain to 300%, and add another bunch of nasty stuff like Bane. Everybody would be screaming on forums that this fight is impossible, there are too many nodes, it's a cash grab. However, when you bring in the Quake, you would have exactly as difficult of the fight as you did in the first place without any nodes on at all. So if Corvus went from, let's say, power index of 10 to 150, whatever, Quake still remained on her original difficulty index of the fight. Therefore, that is the main reason why I do personally believe that Quake is the best champion in the game, just because she is able to maintain her fighting style pretty much against every single opponent, and the difficulty of the fight does not increase accordingly as it would with the rest of the champions in the content. Yeah, I think I said it more or less right. Anyway, just a last point, kind of like a bit of advice is, I have made a how-to Quake video showing my finger cam, and I did explain how I started to practice Quake and what did I do to learn to play the character as well as I do on constant basis. And I will be adding a link to that video in the description below. So if you are interested in Quake and you want to learn how to play her better, I definitely urge you to watch that video, because there I try my best to explain kind of like my finger movements, my reactions, and how to actually practice playing her. Here in the background is one of my favorite practice champions, Rhino in Road to the Labyrinth in Chapter 4, Quest 5, just because he's full immune. He has a lot of kind of physical resistance, and that fight is not gonna go down quickly. And because he's fully immune, you actually have to kind of like constantly deal with barrage of opponents' attacks, and this was one of the fights that helped me kind of like to play with the Quake better. But anyways, I hope you guys did enjoy the video. If you did, please do feel free to like, share, and subscribe, and I'm gonna see you guys back to my channel soon. See ya!